Hi everybody and welcome to the Local Food Growers in Scotland channel on YouTube. My name's John Riley and today I'm going to have a chat with Jennifer Macdonald from Woodside Farm on Arran, who's kindly agreed to come on and have a chat with me about the operation that they have there, how they started and sort of pros and cons of what's happened over the years since they started. So first of all, welcome Jennifer and thanks for coming on.
Hi.
How are you?
Yes, good, thank you. Busy as always, even as the season comes to a close. Still manic at Arran, but good, thanks.
Excellent. Could we just bash on then and go back to square one, where you decided you were going to get this off the ground? How did it all happen? How did it all come about, and why did you choose where you chose?
So my husband and I had been looking for a piece of land for a really long time. Land access is a massive topic in itself, but it was really challenging. And we came across a much longer story than this, but I'll keep it short, an abandoned farm that we'd been driving back and forth as we were working on a community project on Arran. And he said, look, Jenny, this place has been empty. I don't know anything about it. Go and do some detective work and see if you can find out about it. So anyway, a very long story short, it turned out that this farm had been, a foreign gentleman had bought it, lived in it for a short period of time, but then lived in Dubai. So it sat empty for about 6 years. And you could definitely tell that. It was full of brambles and every perennial weed you could ever have a nightmare about, it was there. But anyway, after a series of emails and a bit of chat, we managed to talk him into giving us a year's lease. So basically the way we came upon land is the exact way I would never recommend anyone does, because for the first 3 years we had no security. We had no secure tenancy. It was all very informal, but having waited the better part of a decade to get access to land, we knew this was our chance. And even though it was a massive risk, we invested our time and our resources because we were just so keen to get a growing project started. So as I say, I wouldn't recommend that to anyone else. Have security, have a little bit more support than that. But we were just so keen, and we're very fortunate that over time we've built up a really good relationship with him. We now have a secure tenancy of 5 years, a proper agricultural tenancy, and so we're able to develop in a way that we couldn't to begin with. But we both come from community work, charity work, these kind of sides. And while that's vastly important work, what we found is sometimes the bureaucracy can slow down the practicalities, and we're both very much doers. So we decided early on that we were just going to get the ball rolling and do the graft, do the work, and then reach out for other directors, other community members, because we didn't want to waste that first year we had. We knew if we spent the first 6 months talking about it, we would possibly pass up on the opportunity. So again, maybe not everyone's strategy that they would want to, but we knew we had an opportunity and we had to hit the ground running. So that was the way we got started here at Woodside. Since then, we've done lots of different things and had lots of different people being involved, but the backbone of it really is my husband and myself. And I think that's important with any growing or farming. At the end of the day, somebody on a cold, wet January morning is still going to have to get up and tend to whatever it is you're doing. So having a couple of people who are completely dedicated, obviously it doesn't need to be a husband and wife, it can be any kind of partnership or a single person, depending on the scale. But having somebody that's just going to get the job done is vitally important, I think, to see you through the difficult times. And there will be difficult times if you're trying to do something at scale. That is not a question of it's just an inevitability. So having that that understanding of who your core team is and what their responsibilities is, it's been really important to us.
Okay, and did you set out with the CSA from day one? Sorry, we should maybe say that's a community supported agriculture scheme for people that don't know what that is. But did you decide that from day one, and how did you go about getting your customers?
So there was 2 things we decided from day one. First of all, that we didn't want to be a limited company. We wanted to be a social enterprise. We didn't want to be a charity because you have to have all sorts of things in place, board of directors, all that kind of things. But we also quite strongly believed while people should make a fair and decent living from food, it should be contributed to their community. It shouldn't just be one person making lots of money. The whole social economic model of why food is failing is because it's based on that model. And so we started out very quickly that we wanted to be a social enterprise. That means we've got an asset lock, and anything that goes above and beyond our income is redistributed within the community or within projects which we then diversify into. And secondly, that we were going to be champions for CSA, community supported agriculture. Not just because of the reasons that some people are in terms of like share of responsibility and share of risk, but more from the education side. Like a massive part of what we do is not just putting food in the ground, but explaining to people why that's important, explaining to people just how complex and skilled and time consuming good food is. So we really wanted to have those things integrated from day one. That philosophy is where we come from, over profit, over, even the scaling up to quick production levels. It was always going to have those two things about the community being integrated in the actual constitution and education being a massive part of what we do.
Okay, so how did you go about getting your customers on day one then?
A huge part of our marketing comes from social media. It obviously has its pitfalls, but we have like local community forum groups, local community for sales pages, these kind of things, mainly on Facebook, but also have quite a lot of Instagram followers who enjoy seeing the pictures and things of the farm. We're obviously a tourist island, so that's a good way to connect with people who are just dipping in and out of what we do rather than being our mainstay. So I'd say a massive part of it was social media. A little bit of traditional media. Our local paper did some bits and pieces on us, but also word of mouth. Absolutely, without a doubt, word of mouth, because in a lot of ways our produce does the job for us. Give somebody a fresh carrot straight out of the ground and it's so different from what they buy from the supermarket that it only takes one bite and there's 3/4 of your education and certainly a good chunk of your marketing done right there. So I would say those three things, a local paper doing a bit of an editorial, social media through and through again, and then word of mouth is how we get customers and people involved.
Okay, so the nature of your growing project then, is it it's organic, isn't it? And is it a no-dig system, or have you not gone down that route?
No, we're very much so. We are quite influenced by some of the work coming out of the States and Canada. People like Elliot Coleman, Jean Martin Fortier, Richard Perkins up in Sweden, doing the 30-inch no-dig biointensive beds. The way I learned to grow was on the traditional 120 double dig. So it has been an evolution over the last 10, 15 years. Charles Dowding, of course, in the UK is a great inspiration as well. But when it comes to doing this in a way that is heavily leaned on production, it's been really interesting to move away from our permaculture roots, which, all curves and lines and in between spaces. And I still love that method of design. But at the end of the day, we're trying to feed people. So we need straight rows that can be planted, weeded and harvested well. And so for us, that 30-inch no-dig bed system takes a little bit to establish, but once it's up and running, it's just an absolutely fantastic system. Never again will I go back to big, long, stretchy 120 beds and double digging. Never.
That's really interesting. And how did you clear the ground of weeds before you set your beds up?
So there's no doubt that you need a big amount of input for the first few years of the system. You need heavy amounts of compost. We predominantly used cardboard and then compost directly on top. But we've had to do all sorts of things. We've used different mulches. Some of our beds have got wood chip in between, other paths. We've used all sorts of stuff. We do use some tarpaulins and black plastics to clear ground as well, feeling that the multiple seasons we get out of that justifies the use of the plastics, but it's something we constantly reevaluate and weigh up. But we're up to I think it's 1,300 meters squared of beds now, and even with a core team of 3 or 4 in the summer, that's an awful lot of space to weed. And no dig, no doubt, keeps the weeds down, but it doesn't eradicate them. The only thing that eradicates them is constantly getting rid of them at the thread stage. when the first true leaves pop through, and that just takes time unless you use some, mulches. Obviously wool carpet, all these things can also be useful, but when you're at our scale, it's just not practical for a gardener, a home gardener, allotment holder, fantastic, but not at a commercial market garden scale.
Right, good, that's good advice. So you want to tell us a bit about the crops that you maybe started growing and maybe have now changed because you found they either didn't grow or they didn't sell? Do you want to give us some guidance on that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that if I could go back in time, I would really re-educate myself on. I'm a foodie through and through. That's part of why I love what I do. But I realize now that when you're feeding the community, you have to feed them what they want, not what you want. So I very much go by the adage now that if you have to explain it, you won't sell it. So, long have gone my oriental greens and, all these fantastic things that I like to grow, and I still do for as a hobbyist, but basically I go 80-20. So 80% of what we now do is carrots, cabbages, salads, all of these things. And then 20% each year, I sneak a few things in and go, oh, look, here's a kohlrabi, or oh, here's salsify, and slowly educate people. Because at the end of the day, there's no point growing for your community if they're not going to eat it. So the staples go very well. The traditional diet, if you're trying to get in touch with people who wouldn't naturally be inclined to your project, I think it's really important to start the conversation at what they're comfortable with. So I was trying to speak to people about organic and no dig and throwing them all this unusual food at the same time. It was too disengaged from what they were familiar with. So when I went in with a brilliant tasting carrot or a bag of salad that was so fresh you could like crisp the lettuce, that was an easy way to then take the conversation to somewhere out of their comfort zone rather than going in there with too much all at once.
That's really interesting, actually, because I know some of the guys, I mean, the ones that you mentioned, they talk about making sure you're growing the profitable stuff, and cutting out the stuff like catties because they're not that profitable. But I guess in your situation, that just, as you've said, doesn't really work.
Well, I think, again, another thing that these different people who are in the media and YouTube are fantastic, but you have to remember that they live in a very different culture, although it's a Western English-speaking culture. Most of them live by a main metropolitan city, so they have a very different clientele to a rural Scottish clientele. Yeah. And also, yes, the commercial thing is really important, and again, it's something that community groups need to think about. You cannot rely on volunteers sustainably. You will burn people out and your project will fail. So you have to be commercially minded, as much as that's sometimes a bit uncomfortable for people who are inclined to this kind of community work. Yeah. I would tell people, if you want to make a difference in the world currently is run by money. You might want to change that, but for now you have to fit within that. Yeah. So that is important. But it's also, as I say, a gradual relationship. It's not something, if you live outside Toronto, people have been eating heritage tomatoes for 15 years. If you live outside of Brodick, people get a bit freaked out when you give them a green striped tomato. They think it's not ripe. They don't realize it's something, that people in, outside of New York would pay a profit for. So you've really got to start where your community is at and work from there. Again, that would have saved us a lot of effort in the early years if we'd not came at it from our eyes, but came at it from the eyes of the average Joe on Arran. Yeah, no, that's really interesting and really good advice. And I just had a question in my head there and it's gone clean out of my head. Oh, what was it just when you were talking about that? I can't think what it was. Oh dear. He'll come back 5 minutes after I say bye.
Yeah, probably will. And it was a pertinent one and it's completely gone. I'm getting old. What was I going to ask you there? Oh, I know what it was. As a social enterprise, then, does that, even though you are selling on a commercial basis, does that position you to be able to look for funding, for grant funding from the likes of wind farm funds and things like that? Or did you have to do it completely on your own back in terms of using your own money and your own loans?
Well, it's safe to say we've done a bit of both. I am a massive fan and advocate of the social enterprise model because it exists exactly to fill the space that you're kind of describing there. Yes, we can be commercially driven. Yes, as directors and managers, we can take a salary from the organisation when it's profitable enough to allow us to do that. But on the other hand, it also means that we are, as I say, tied into our community. Everything's got to be fed back into the business or asset locked to another community organisation. But a lot of funding out there exists. Whether that'll continue to exist in a post-Brexit, post-COVID economy, I don't know. But currently there is funding sources out there, and we've been very fortunate to get a lot of support from different Scottish government backed organisations, which we simply didn't have the money for the stuff to get this project started, and it wouldn't have happened without that. So it takes a good bit of time. I wouldn't want people to look at it naively thinking that there's, money for free, because it's far, far from it. There's a lot of administrative processes, but there is support out there if you're willing to do that work.
Yeah. So what were the key things that you managed to get funding for? I'm sure there's 101 questions I can ask you here, but I'll probably keep this down to probably the last one, and we'll maybe talk again in the future. So what were the key things that you managed to get funding for?
Well, the initial startup, there's an organisation called Firstport who are fantastic because they hold your hand from basically the idea stage right and through until you're, we're still working with them 4 years down the line now as we scale up our operation. So Firstport are somebody that I can't praise enough, because they, as I say, support you from the beginning. A lot of the other bigger organisations, be it the National Lottery, or we work with Highlands and Islands in our regions, they need you fully constituted with all the kind of appropriate governance and all these things in place. So to start up with, I would say go to Firstport if you're a social enterprise. Speak to your local authority. Quite often, I don't know, every local authority is different. And it's taken us a while to build up a relationship, but North Ayrshire Council have been really supportive of the work we do, and we're constantly developing our relationship with them. So, the other side is crowdfunding. We've never massively done it because we haven't had to, but I like the idea of crowdfunding not only as a revenue stream, but as an advertising and engagement stream, because you put out a little bit of a video or have an open day. It's a great way to get people engaged in what you're doing.
Yeah. But what were the key things that you got funding for?
Polytunnels.
Right.
So season extension, also a little bit of staffing at times when we needed some support in the seasons, and some stuff like specialist seeding equipment, paper pot transplanters, jang seeders, these kind of things, which are big investments. But once you make the return on that capital clear, funders are quite happy to support, because you're showing that initial investment is self-sustaining, because you're going to use that for 10 years to produce income from. So it's a good capital expenditure that will be supported. Yeah.
Well, I think what I've learned today has been amazing, to be honest, and very much appreciated, because I had a huge amount of questions and you've answered an awful lot of them there. And I think it would be great if we can I'd love to come across and see you, talk to you face to face on the farm, maybe in the spring when everything's sort of hopefully getting a bit sunnier.
Well, certainly once COVID regulations allow and things have settled down a bit, our approach next year will be to have more on-site visits. Probably best to keep up with our social media once that gets going, but we certainly want to start running some no-dig market gardening courses, and we have a big poultry enterprise as well, so supporting people through that. And it's definitely in the forefront of our minds as to how to support other communities to start up projects like these in their own area.
Fantastic. Well, thanks ever so much for coming on and having a chat today, Jennifer. I'll stop the recording just now and I'll have a quick chat with you before we go. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye.